What's up, guys? I know it's been a while since I've posted. I've been working on this series related to Subarus and how to fix them, so that's been taking up a lot of my time. Also, if you're a new subscriber, thank you guys for all the subscriptions. I really appreciate all the support and positive comments that I've gotten. We're taking a slight deviation to do some Subaru content, but I do have the V8 4Runner towed here, and I got some content coming on that. Not only that, I just picked up a 22RE SR5 2nd gen. Something that that's manual transmission. Ever since I sold my exact car like that, minus the SR5, no sunroof, with a 6-inch lift on it, I've regretted it. So I've always wanted another one, because the 22REs are just iconic. If you know about them, you know what I'm talking about. So I bought that. We'll see what I end up doing with that. But we'll get back to some 4Runner content here in a bit. For now, I'm gonna share all my secrets on fixing Subarus. I've repaired more of these than you guys can imagine, and it turns out that I guess I'm good at it or something. So we also got an EJ20 sitting over there, waiting for a Legacy GT over there. And it turns out I've looked for a video on YouTube and no one knows how to do it correctly. So that will probably be part like 9 or so, as it wasn't supposed to be so many parts, but there's a lot of information in this series. So with that in mind, the videos are pretty long, but there's a lot of technical knowledge in here, step-by-step instructions on how to deal with intricate parts like a cylinder head and a block that needs to be completely disassembled and put back together. So I hope you guys enjoy the upcoming videos, and if you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment. And if I know the answers, I will reply and inform you to whatever you're curious about. Enjoy, guys. I just picked up this Outback to make this series. So I was told it has blown head gaskets. However, I didn't even look at this car. They just dropped it off to the shop. Regardless, the motor needs to come out. So for the first video, I'm gonna go ahead and walk you guys through how to pull this motor out. The easiest way, the fastest way. So let's get to it. I'm gonna be doing this out at my house, not at the shop in the bay. I want this to be apparent that you can do it wherever. We're doing this in a dirt driveway with a cherry picker with my basic tools. So let's head out to the house and take this thing apart. The head gaskets are definitely gone, and it's only running on 3 cylinders. So if you look at the motor, it shakes really bad. It's always a good idea to check your codes before you take the car apart. That way we know what we're dealing with for future reference. So let's see, cylinder 2 misfire detected. Check engine light, blinking cruise, pretty standard. Here are the basic tools that I use. I got your Harbor Freight 10 through 19. I like the extendable wrench. It has nice added leverage when you're in places where you can use it. This has got to be one of my favorite ratchets that I use, a flex head 3/8 drive. It's pretty much a breaker bar. Then I have straight needle nose, 45 degree and 90 degree. Very useful to have. These are my pliers for loosening hoses. I grab around them and get them to twist before pulling them off. These, same thing. A nice little hammer. Then for open ends, I run an 8, a 10, a 12, 14, 17, 19. And this 7/8 I use for the EGR pipe and for oxygen sensors. A bin of random extensions. The most useful is gonna be this wobble extension. Mine is pretty worn out. I need a new one. Generally, I have a couple more picks and small flatheads in here, but I don't know where they are. And then here are my random ones that are useful. So I have like a short 10, short 12, short 14. Sometimes these are very nice. Like the bottom tranny bolt between the CV, you need a short 14. And then for head bolts, you need a 12.14. 5/16 fuel disconnect tool. And it's really nice to have a couple wobbles. I only have a 12 and a 14. Then of course I got all my impacts, which you don't need them, but they make your life a lot easier. Just picked up the M12 line. And this thing is just so badass. It is worth every penny. You need a magnet, some pry bars, flatheads, Phillips, a good old bungee, and those are the basic tools I use to pull apart Subarus. On top of that, it's really nice to have a bigger pry bar. That's a Harbor Freighter. First thing we want to do is pop the hood and let the motor cool down. This one's still pretty warm, but whatever, we're gonna go ahead and dive into it. Time-wise, we are just starting and it is 6:23. First thing we wanna do is drain the coolant, so get yourself a drain pan and your impact with the 12mm. And some of these have a huge skid plate that goes over everything, and you gotta unbolt a 12mm over here. This one does not, so you only have to take out this 12mm right here. And it and the spacer drop out. Then you can pull this kind of down into the side, and that will give you access to this Phillips where you can drain the radiator. So grab a flathead. And trust me, a flathead strips this a lot less than a screwdriver actually does, a Phillips screwdriver. So just get in there. Make sure to watch out because hot coolant is about to come dripping down. And there it is already, and it's pretty warm. Definitely could have cooled it down a little bit more. Ah, yeah, that's hot. Now, when you pop this cap, it will really start coming out the bottom. There it goes. Now that coolant's draining, we're gonna dive into the top end. Let me give you guys a quick rundown of what we're gonna attack. First of all, this needs to come off. It looks like someone's already put it on very badly, so once you pop those out, you can just pull up on it, up forward. See how it's curved? It just slides right out. Get rid of that. And then we're gonna go for the accessories and everything. First of all, intake. We got a 10mm nut right in here. You can access it with a wobble right through there, but it's easy to just get an open end and get that off. Depending on the year, you'll have 1 or 2 bolts down here. This one has 2, so 2 bolts right there. Another there, another there. 4 total. And then there's 2 hoses with these clamps. You don't have to even do anything with the clamps, just grab the hose and pull it off. Once those are removed, we got a 10mm right here and the bolts. Once you crack it loose, you can generally spin it off by hand. And now, very important, we're gonna start on bolt organization. Whatever I take apart, I put it up in the cowl and I start here and I work my way that way. That way, upon reassembly, you just work your way down the reverse. So unplug your MAF, just press this and pop it out. Just a good old long extension. And it makes getting these bolts down here a breeze. Hose clamp. And the hose clamp you just have to loosen. You don't have to take it off a bunch. Last but not least, there's this electrical connection. You pop this tab and you pull the white part. The rest stays on the intake. Once the white part's disconnected, you grab the electrical connection and you pull it forward. It just pops off. Then you can remove the whole intake assembly without disassembling it any further. For part organization, I do the same thing as bolts. So I have this nice clean table. I will start laying parts across the table as I take them apart, just like I'm doing with the bolts. And then when it comes time for reassembly, everything just goes back in the opposite order. It makes for the best way to complete your job and not be looking for what is the next step. Now that the intake's off, we're gonna tackle the front accessories. Coolant's drained, so I can pull this upper hose, and then we can get the fans, which there's 2 10s on each fan. So this reservoir needs to come out. Then we can get the covers off on here and move on to the accessories themselves. Coolant reservoir, super easy. Pull this hose off. Then you're gonna jam a flathead against this push tab right here, and that will allow it. So I don't think it was actually clipped in. So let's say if it is clipped in, you push a flathead there, go like that, pops out, and then you just lift it straight out. Then go ahead and get the 10mm on the fans. Also, this hood bracket needs to come out of the way. It's a 10mm. Now get the upper radiator hose out of the way. Someone's put a hose clamp on this side, so I had to grab a flathead. But if you have these are infinitely better than hose clamps, as they change over time with the hose, so they never need to be adjusted. As the hose changes more and more with heat, those will become loose, and in the long run, I actually see them leak more than the stock clamp. To get the fans out, there is this little tab, and it can be kind of a pain to get to, but what you want to do is pull up. Let me get my glove off to make it more clear. You just see that thing. Pull the connection. So what we were doing was pulling up on this tab. Same goes for the other side. It is a lot harder to get to. So I can tell someone's already been in this because this is normally clipped. There's a hole for it that it clips on here. It's so freaking hard to get it off that I recommend, if yours is clipped, just push down on it till it breaks off, and it will just be hanging like this one, no big deal. So once it's off like that, you can pull this tab and pull it. There we go. And the driver's side one will have auto tranny lines hooked in it, but this one's manual. So you're gonna wanna reach down here and pull your auto tranny lines back. As you can tell, it would have been a good idea to take that plastic piece off, but I got it. So this right here is where your auto tranny line will be clipped, just like that, and you just have to pull it back, and that's it. Let's get rid of these and get rid of the front belts. These are all 10 millimeters. This shield's off. This one, you gotta loosen the 12 millimeter that holds the alternator. Once it's loose, you can just swivel it up and it pops off. Shields are good. Now for belts, we gotta loosen the 12 here, loosen the 12 here, then both the adjusters will work. Grab yourself this awesome wrench I love and your 12 mil, and then crack them loose. And you can release tension on them. This one, it will back out a lot and just hit the top of your impact. There we go. Now the belt should be untensioned and they can just slide right off. Good time to inspect your belts. These ones look good, so I don't think we're gonna need to replace them. They're Napa belts, so they've probably just been changed. And now they're prepped to come off the motor. I've stopped working too hard on these, so I don't disconnect any of the electrical. I don't even pull the battery. You guys should disconnect the battery. So go ahead and disconnect the battery. Hook it right up here to your strut, stays out of the way. Now that the battery's disconnected, we can continue. We're gonna pull this bolt, and then the alternator will be free, and we can just put it over here. When you do this one, make sure to hold this nut or it will fall. Then undo these clasps. You pull one like that and the other like this, and it just comes up. Get yourself a flathead. There's a little tab back here. Pop that off. Now your alternator, you want to pivot it up. Get it so there's no tension on the bolt. Pull your bolt. And now this is probably gonna break. They always do. You try not to hit it with the alternator, but the best way to pull the alternator is tapping it upward. And there it goes. It just needs to pry itself out. And then this, I literally just put to the side. I put it over here. Next up, let's go for power steering. There's two 12 millimeters on the front and one up here. Then we got the electrical connection. You can just push on this tab and it should come right out. So I'll start with the two front ones. You'll feel a bunch of other 10 mils and stuff down here. It's the only 12 mil. And I am referring to the head size of the bolt, as these are only like 8mm bolts. The top bolt is straight down. You can see it kind of behind that wiring right there. Once you're on it, you can just push the wiring to the side. And there's the power steering. I literally see so many techs disconnect the line and drain the power steering fluid, and there's no point. You just take this and you put it where your intake was. You're done. That's it. I don't know why people complicate this. Now that we're right here and we can see everything, we're gonna go ahead and disconnect the oxygen sensors. Just push down, wiggle. Same with this one, push down, wiggle. Next up, you take a screwdriver and push on these tabs, and you can pivot it forward like that, and then it will come out. Someone's already broke it, but I was just showing you guys, these are trash now, and I will zip tie them. Just hit one side of the back and they come out. No need to hit both. Hit one, pivot. AC time. We got 4 bolts in it. There's 1, 2, third one's back there, kind of the hardest one to get to. And 4 is right there. Since these ones need extensions to come off, they load up the extension a lot, so I recommend using your good old breaker, 3/8, whatever you want to call it, and just cracking them all loose. For the back one, it's very useful to use that wobble extension. You need the tiniest bit of angle on your socket. So this is perfect for getting it done. Once they're cracked, grab your impacts, zip them out. And that's why I hate this thing, it just drops sockets everywhere. That being said, it's been worn out for like a year and I should just buy another one, because I've put it through a lot of abuse and it's actually been a very good extension. I just need to replace it. I hate it. Last but not least, get the front bolt. And then the connection, just push and pull. All right, let's tackle some of the lines over here. We got this fuel line. It has this stupid cover thing. You just pull it off. I guess it's a safety in case the latch fails. Then we got a 5/16 quick disconnect tool. These Subaru ones, they never fit right. I always jam in half and push on them. You want to push them in to release the tension off it. And just wiggle this thing in there. And then once you get it done on half, flip it. And this might take some finesse. I'm not gonna lie. If there is a tool, you should get it, because this is the way I do it all the time, but it's not easy. And watch out for fuel. So once it's disconnected, jam your fuel line over here. The evap line has a little hose clamp, so just pop that back. And now these always break, so it's probably gonna break if you just pull on it. What you wanna do is grab it and twist. And you don't pull any hose till you get it twisting. Once it twists, there's a chance you might actually be able to get it off. So then pull and twist at the same time, and it will start wiggling its way off. If you just pull, I guarantee you'll break this hose, which is not a huge deal, but it's better to avoid breaking stuff. The vacuum line for your brakes is very easy. There's a clamp on it, don't even bother with that, just pull, comes right off. Pop it up here to the side so it's not in your way. Now that those lines are out of the way, we can grab the AC compressor, flip it upside down. Careful not to arc the positive to any negative. Grab your bungee, hook it, and then I generally just hook it around the coil spring on the car. And that's it, that will hold it out of the way. Now we can actually pull the alternator out of the way, and we can pull this stay and put it up on the strut tower. I see way too many people work way too hard on that stuff. Just disconnect it, shove it to the side, you're done. As you can see, this is pretty far along the way already. Next up, we're gonna do heater hoses, which those are a pain. So we'll also do the starter, and then we're gonna pull the front bolt on the pitch mount. Don't pull the pitch mount, just the front bolt. If you have an Outback or Impreza, this is a great time to put it in I blew my head gasket mode, which is this hole right down here. It gives you a lot more room to get to those back bolts. The heater hoses can be fun, and not in the fun way. But your 90-degree needle nose will really help. Just pop your clamps upward like that. And if it's not oriented right, you can just turn it by pulling on it. And then it will be way easier to get on. And if you can get on it, you can get it off. Now it's time for these pliers. You want to grab around, and just like on that fuel line hose, you want to twist before you bother pulling. Because if it won't twist, there's no way it's going to pull off. That is, in fact, another cheat code. Because it can be the difference between 20 minutes on that line and 2 minutes. Go ahead and pull the heater core lines up and pop them up here, point it up so that they'd stop leaking coolant everywhere for when you're under the car. I gotta say, the engine wiring is probably my favorite part of a Subaru and their design, is they have a bulkhead disconnect. So there's a little stay down here that's a 10 mil, and you push this button right here. This comes loose. And you don't want to just push on this. I've seen too many of these come in broken. So you want to pull on the wiring and push on that. I pulled on it, it came out, that's perfect. That is literally all your engine wiring disconnected right here. Wiring wise, the motor is now ready to come out. I'm gonna go ahead and finish out the tranny bolts. The starter bolts on that side are the top two. This side we got 1, 2 under this bracket right here. And then we should have 3 and a nut, which is 4. So 4 on each side, boom. 2 are done on that side. Got the 1 down there, and there's a nut below it. And now, if, like I said, I was gonna show you guys if this was automatic. If this was automatic, right under the starter, there's another bolt right here. So there will be 3 from the engine to the tranny, and then the starter will have a stud here instead of a bolt, and then 1 bolt up here. I'm gonna go ahead and get all the tranny bolts disconnected, and you can hit all of them from the top. I see so many people hit them from the bottom. I just do them from the top, sitting on the motor. I went ahead and grabbed a 6.9/16, which is, you know, a 14, whatever, so I don't round these. Top. Second to top. And make sure to keep these in order on your windshield, because the top one is actually longer. It is the longest on both sides on the manuals. That one, to be honest, guys, you're probably not going to be able to get an impact on. I sent it a little bit sideways, which is why you can see all these marks on it. I probably shouldn't have, but I did. And the cheat code for doing the lower nut from the top is a short 9/16 and this swivelly wrench. Barely has enough room between the CV and it. And these things, I hate when these are tight. That's why you really need this wrench. It helps out so much. Once you get it loose, ratcheting 9/16 is your friend. Or 14. I think this is actually the 14. And there we go. That's all the tranny bolts on this side. Hi guys, Future Colin here. I lost audio for half this video, so I'm gonna be splicing with footage from pulling the motor on this Forester. All Subarus are basically the same, but there are some good points. This is automatic, so I'll actually be able to show you guys how to disconnect the torque converter through the access hole down here. And on the manual transmissions, this intake bracket goes down on the side of the manual transmission. Since this is an automatic, we can go ahead and pull these 2 bolts and get this mount out of our way before we pull the starter. 12 millimeter. 2 bolts. For the torque converter, we're gonna go ahead and remove the throttle body. So we need to pull this coolant line here, this second coolant line right here, and the 4 bolts holding the throttle body on. Now with all that disconnected, we can pull the throttle body. And there's no need to disconnect any of the electrical connections, but that will give us good access to this hole. Push this notch on the cover that way, it will fall out. That is our access hole to get to the torque converter bolts. So now we need a 7/8 to turn the crank pulley and line up the 12 millimeters. Then we can remove them and disconnect the engine from the transmission. This is what I use to turn the crank. And just rotate it so you can see the head. Now get this swivel-headed wrench with a 6.12 on it. Don't use a 12 point, because if you strip these, you're gonna have the worst day. So the engine will rotate a little and the head of the wrench will hit the side of the engine block. Once it locks on the side of the engine block, you can pull it and it will crack loose like that. Once it's a little loose, you should be able to do it by hand. Now when you're taking these out, make sure not to drop them. It's not a huge deal if you do, other than it might potentially lock the motor up and you need to be able to get all 4 of these out, or else you have to pull the torque converter. So that's what it looks like when you pull it out. There are 3 more of them, so let's go ahead and rotate it a 1/4 turn. And get the rest of them out. There's the other one. If you can use both hands and get multiple fingers on it, it's a lot easier to get it off. Oh yeah. Sometimes 2 fingers on one hand is all you need. Ka-chow! Now that the torque converter is disconnected, I recommend putting the throttle body back on so that nothing can fall in the intake. Now we're on to the driver's side transmission bolts. You want to start with the lower starter nut. And you want to do that because if you release the top first, then the starter will fall as you do the lower and it makes it hard to get out. So I take my ratcheting 14 open end and put it on the lower stud, and they can be really tight. So once you have it on, I take a hammer and just hit it down like an impact. That's all it takes. Properly applied force makes it very easy. There we go. Now we can take our wobbly 3/8 drive and get the upper. I pull the starter up like so and disconnect the signal wire. There's a button you got to push on. Then you can put the starter up here to the side. So we got a bolt up here and a stud like I'm talking about. The autos have this other bolt right behind it.
Sometimes I forget it, so don't forget it. And then you can see right below, we got those 2 additional bolts. Well, one's a nut, one's a bolt. Those are the last 3 transmission bolts. I recommend cracking them by hand so you don't strip them. Once they're loose, I hit them with the impact. Make sure to be in reverse. Oh, this is not easy to film and do. The camera's really being tough and keeps falling, so this is the best angle I can get you guys. And this is pretty much the hardest transmission bolt. Oh. Got it. That is all the transmission bolts, pitch mount, wiring, intake, fans, AC compressor, alternator, power steering pump, hose, fuel lines, starter. That's it. The motor's ready to come out topside. So now all we got to do is get underneath and do everything bottom side. Now, a huge reason I love working on Subarus is the bottom side is super easy. We got 6 exhaust bolts that are 14s, 2 motor mount bolts that are 14s. There will be 2 grounds on an Outback that are 10 millimeters that go into the heads. Because I lost audio, I'm working on the Forester. The Forester has quick clip tabs up here, one there, and one here. But the Outbacks and Imprezas have 2 10 millimeters into each head. And then the last thing is the lower radiator hose. And that's literally everything. So once I do all those lower bolts, we're ready to pull the motor out. All right, let's go underneath and start with the motor mount bolts. I can't get the impact on it straight and I don't want to strip it. So I'm gonna get a wrench for that one. I can get on this one. Now we will use this wrench so we don't strip it. Shout out to the ground for being my cameraman. Now for the exhaust, I use a 6-inch extension and the long 14. Then we'll start with the driver's side because it's easier to see. We have two outside bolts and 1 inner bolt in there. Sometimes it pulls the stud, no big deal. And now the same thing on the driver's side. If you have an 06 Plus, the catalytic converter's here instead of back there. And yeah, it's a little harder to see in there. There are all the lower bolts. The only thing we have left is the radiator hose. It actually looks pretty sus in there, like it's been leaking. But this is why I won't just do valve cover gaskets on a car with 140,000 miles. They all need more work. I just grabbed some channel locks. I'm gonna try to get it rotating because it does not want to come off. There we go. It's moving now. So yeah, guys, don't try to pull off any hose without getting it twisting. They won't come off. They're cemented on there. Now that it's twisting, I should be able to pull it.
Ooh. As you guys can tell, there is a lot of rust and corrosion on this motor. This is the Chicago car. So when I did the manual, they automatically started separating, but I thought that was a bad example, so I'm more glad I'm doing this. As you can see, they're stuck together still. We have no gap between the transmission and the engine. We want to focus on getting a gap so they're ready to start separating. I recommend jumping on the crank pulley, and sometimes that will get them to start separating. Just shove down. And we still have 0 separation. So that means this is gonna be one of the harder ones to get to separate, judging by just how I had to hit the starter with a hammer to get it out. They're probably stuck together pretty good. What I'm gonna do is get a hammer and a screwdriver and pound it between the engine and transmission and see if we can just get a little separation going. It's funny, I used to work at a machine shop and we'd always be like, wow, what gorilla took this apart? Now I'm doing it because these things do not like coming apart if they're from a rusty area. There we go. See that gap starting to form? That's what we want. There's 2 dowel pins, one on each side, and they get super tight with corrosion. And watch your eyes when you're doing this, guys, because I've had screwdrivers fire off pieces of plastic. We got a little separation. I would like more, but considering the level of corrosion, I want to go ahead and pick the motor up and put some tension on it forward, and then I will continue to pry it apart. For hooking up the motor, we got this factory pull point back here, so we can hook a chain to there. The factory point over here is on the AC compressor bracket. So you want to pull, there should be 3 or 4 bolts. It looks like on this one there's 3, 1, 2, 3. Then you can take this bracket off and you want to put this bracket back on the block with 2 bolts. I work on so many of these that I keep one around. So here's the bracket once you have it off, and the factory point is up here. You can go straight down to the block. I used to go straight down to here, but then it just always made the engine tilt at a weird angle. So this is the way I recommend doing it. 2 AC bolts, treat it like one in the back, one in the front. And I only go hand tight with these. There's really no reason to go tighter. Make sure to give it a tug test and make sure no sensors are being caught in it. Sometimes these will get caught in it, so you want to make sure when you pull, none of that is going to get broken. Now let's go ahead and set up the cherry picker and get this thing connected. Now I started getting old, so I bought a pneumatic ram because this is just so much easier than jacking this thing off for 30 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a little pull. And there it cleared the motor mounts and exhaust. So now I'm gonna roll the car backward to get a little tension on it. And we still have very minimal separation, but now with a little tension on it, you can see it's kind of tilted that way, so it's pulling forward. Now we might be able to get it to go. And the most important part of this step that I need you guys to pay attention to is we cannot let the torque converter come out of the transmission. That will cause a whole mess of headaches that I really don't want to deal with. I'm gonna go try to get as close to the dowel pin as I can and just send the screwdriver. That's definitely what it's catching on, is that stupid dowel pin. Let's give it some real push now. That sounded like something went. Passenger side, dowel pin's almost out. There's the dowel pin on that side. And the torque converter is launching the right way. So if you guys can see in here, you want to make sure the torque converter stays with the transmission. If it's not and it's trying to hop out, you want to stick a pry bar in there and shove it back in. I'm going to go up a couple clicks.
make sure it's clear of the motor mounts. Then we'll get the big bar and see if we can get some real separation. It's just stuck on that dowel pin, I can see it. It is unfortunately really hard to film this and do it, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do it, and it should pop out. Come on, dowel pin, there it goes. And look at our torque converter. It is pulling out of the flex plate. A lot of times they don't, and they try to follow the flex plate, and you just want to get a screwdriver in there between this and the flex plate, if you can see that plate there, and push the torque converter back. Ours is going good, so I'm gonna go ahead and continue with the pull. I'm gonna roll back the car a little bit and lift it up. We'll start with giving it a little up, and then rolling back seems important to me right now. And yeah, we're getting pretty close on the crank pulley to the radiator. So that's about where we want to be. And that looks good. We are out. Now I can lift it on up. Be careful with your crank pulley, especially on Outbacks. The radiator tank is right here, and if you hit it with the crank, you will bust the radiator. Right now it seems like our dowel pin's hooking in the tranny, and it is. No big deal, you just gotta be aware. There it goes. Really sucks that Foresters don't have blown head gasket mode, because it is pretty close getting them out of here. But we're at the point where we can roll the car back and buy us a little more. Cleared it. Now we are clear of the core support, so we can get the Subaru out of here. And there we go, guys, the motor is out. You don't need to support the transmission, it just sets on the cross member. For putting it back in, we do need to put a jack under the front diff section of it, right between the axles, but that will be in the install video. Like I said, I lost audio on the other videos. In the other video, I break down the motor and take off all the parts that you need, so you don't just go scrap this motor. Because there are some minor differences, especially between Foresters and Outbacks, so you want to save certain parts on this. Like I could tell you right now, this sensor, you'll see it's white. On Foresters, it's gray. The wiring harness is different and the connections are different. So I know that for a fact. And then I've seen these temperature sensors be different. And for the most part, 06 and up, the crank sensors and the cam sensors are the same. However, 05 and older automatics are different than manuals. So you want to be very aware on this stuff, and you don't want to just throw this away. So that is the extent of the audio I'm gonna fix. For breaking down the motor, I'm gonna leave the bad audio just because I'm not breaking down this motor. This motor is going for a different video and getting head gaskets. But real quick, here's the difference. This is 06 and up, all run this multi-tooth. 05 and older, I've only seen it on Foresters. All Outbacks seem to have this one, but Foresters automatics have this, manuals have this. So if you put in a used motor and you don't swap these, and one was from an auto and you're putting it in a manual, it won't start. Also, the cam sensor is different. The pickups on the back of them, see, this has two teeth. The two-tooth one is for the multi-sprocket crank sensor. If you have this one, it will have, I believe, 2 here, 3 here, 4, and 2, or something like that. It has a lot more pickup points. It has 4 pickup points instead of just the 2. So be really aware. Sorry about the crappy audio, guys, but just pay attention before you scrap your motor, because you might need certain stuff off it if you're putting a used motor in. If you're doing a long block like I'm doing in this series right here, You're gonna wanna pull all this stuff off just to swap it to the bare long block. Time check, it is 7:50. So I'll do some math. I forgot what time I started. But as you guys can tell, I was messing around showing you guys how to deal with the automatics. I was burning myself on coolant. I was just definitely not, this is not my best time, but this is not about the time. I'm only mentioning the time so you guys see just how easy it is to work on Subarus. It would be a little harder if it was automatic, but there's still nothing to pulling these. I don't want a bunch of you guys just taking your motor and scrapping it with a bunch of stuff you need. So I'm gonna rip off everything on this motor that you're gonna need for your new motor. Motor mounts. Clutch. Oh, and if you have this stupid plate, because no one's thrown it away yet, throw it away. Flywheel. Timing kit. Your crank pulley should just pop off. If you reuse your tensioner, you're gonna wanna put a pin in it. I'm replacing all my timing components. So this is trash. So are all these, but it's good to keep the bolts with them so you know which bolts go in the new ones. Timing guide, if it's manual. The automatics don't have these. Timing belt. These little backing covers need to come off. Now we want to transfer over the cam sprockets and the timing gear on the crank. If you have a whole used motor, you might be able to skip this. However, there is small variances in 05 and older. Anything 06 and up should have the multi-tooth sprocket like this. Someone's already exploded this cover, so this thing's trash. Water pump. Probably wondering why I'm taking all this off if I have new stuff for the new long block. Simple reason, the bolts. I don't have new bolts. Dipstick tube. Oh, and there's oil in it, so we'll just put that back in for now. This bracket that holds the tensioner, it actually unbolts. So that pretty much covers it front side. We've covered bottom with the motor mounts, front side. Now the only thing left is top side. Okay, I went ahead and drained the oil while the camera was charging, so now this can come out. Now we got a rim with the tire. Should be a little more stable. Now I'm gonna go ahead and pull the intake manifold. I'll give you guys a quick rundown. EGR tube needs to come off. NOx sensor needs to be disconnected. It's this plug right here. There's 4 bolts on each side. Spark plugs need to be disconnected. Just pull on those. Up here we got the cam sensor, the AVCS sensor, or VVL, variable valve lift, whatever. And then there's an oil pressure sender right here to control it. Crank position sensor. Oil pressure sensor just pulls off. Water temperature sensor right here. Press a little button, pull. These things suck, to be honest. This one's pretty easy. There's a tab back here. You push that, and it should slide off right there. I generally get a pick and hook that thing, and once you pull down on the center thing, it will come off. This curved flathead might actually be the right tool. Your other wires. Other AVCS control solenoid, an oil pressure solenoid, and then there's this little sensor hanging out back here.
Once again, having to do with oil pressure. Just push on it, it comes off. And now the main high wiring connect has this little tab you pull down on. Once you pull down on it, this thing should slide off sideways. And see, you just want to pull that down. PCV valve hose needs to come off. You just pull on it, comes right off. Coolant for the throttle body. We already disconnected it, pretending it was automatic, so we're good there. Let me just get this knock sensor. The EGR tube is pretty easy. Just hit the wrench with your hand and that will loosen it. Now we can hit the 4 bolts on each side, 8 total, that hold the intake manifold to the block. Grab your magnet and pull all the bolts. That way you, first of all, you know you got all 8. And second of all, they can't thread back in a little bit and prevent you from pulling the intake. Don't forget to unhook your chain from when you pulled the engine. And assuming you did everything, that should be it. The intake should lift off. What did I forget? Nothing. Home stretch now. Coolant crossover. And this tube that runs coolant to the water pump. And the knock sensor. These hoses as well for the crankcase ventilation will get swapped to the new one, as well as this bracket that you hooked your chain on. I almost forgot we need all the sensors, so we're gonna go ahead and pull the oil pressure sensor, the AVCS solenoid, and the cam position sensor, as well as the bracket. With the front plastic covers off, you don't need to pull the sensor out of the bracket. It might help, but you can get it off like this. These sensors are sealed in with an O-ring. If they're stubborn, get a flathead. And if you can get it right between where it bolts and the bracket, try not to bend the bracket. But it will bend a little. That will help you get it out though. The pressure sensor up here is a 24. Now we'll do the same for the other side. This sensor right here is a 19. And don't drop the little sealing O-ring. It's a copper crush washer. Here's all those sensors. You might be able to get away with not changing any of these if you have a used motor, but I have seen the connection be different on this between a Forester and a Outback. And that is it. That is completely stripped to a long block. I got to pull this and put it on my new motor for putting it in. These two also need to be swapped over. This one, you guys, don't disconnect this clamp. Just heat it with a torch. It will pull off. My motor's still warm, so it just pulled right off. But it will literally just press on as well. And if it won't, just heat it up with the torch and she'll go on. It's now 8:35, so I pulled and stripped the motor in I don't know how long. I'll post it right here. But as you guys can tell, I wasn't going for speed. My goal was to teach you guys how to do it. So rather than just me doing it and being like, cool, I did it in an hour and 10 minutes, I am hoping to have passed along my knowledge, little tips, how simple it is. You guys saw how quick that was. That's all for part 1, guys. Part 2 is install. This thing is ready to go in there. I just got to dress up everything that I took off. And then part 3 is probably what you guys want to see. I'm going to show you how to rebuild these motors start to finish on a budget and get this thing ready to rock and roll for another 100,000 miles. And yes, it should go more than 100, but it's a damn Subaru. They just love to blow up for no reason. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one.